Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game podcast for the Timberwolves win over the Lakers on Thursday night. Key takeaways from the game, and there's one major one related to the Timberwolves offense that I want to talk about first on the show today. Then some additional takeaways, plus studs and duds from preseason game number 2. It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Hopefully you've had a fantastic week so far and are ready for, next week, believe it or not, the last week of preseason basketball. We're already there. A big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. That's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder that you can get the brand new Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Wolves plus all other Minnesota podcasts are available on the app. More great local sports coverage 24/7. It's absolutely free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on either Roku or Amazon Fire TV. All right. Today is the post-game podcast from Wolves Lakers on Thursday. We're going to do a bit more of a traditional post-game pod on this one that we did earlier this week. I want to cover a few key takeaways, and then we'll do studs and duds. If you're a new listener to the show, that's what we'll do all season long. Typically after a regular season game, we'll actually do a 10-minute or so live postcast, roughly 10 minutes following the game, pretty much immediately following the Wolves game, home or away, all games. And then we'll do a full post-game podcast like this where I'll hit some key takeaways and get a little bit deeper on some of the things that happened during the game. So this will be a lighter version of that, but I still want to spend most of the show in post-game pod world, if you will. So my number one takeaway was the Timberwolves offense. This part is not surprising. And really, I don't know that any of it was surprising. It's more confirming than anything else. Chris Finch is going to run a really creative offense. And we've known that's what he's been known for throughout his career as an assistant, going back to when he coached overseas and of course was an associate head coach and essentially offensive coordinator in New Orleans and Denver and then Toronto and of course in the G League with the Houston organization as an assistant with the Rockets back a while ago. That's Finch's thing, right? He's known for being a creative offensive mind. He's had all kinds of unique personnel, groupings in the past that he's made work. And he's the perfect person to deal with this team that now has 4 superstars that want the ball, right? And I've talked before about how Rudy Gobert is plugging in, basically subbing Rudy Gobert for Jared Vanderbilt. The Wolves offense, let's not be worried about whether or not it can be good because it was a good offense last year with a complete non-factor on the floor in the starting lineup in Jared Vanderbilt. Rudy Gobert is a good offensive player. Yes, he's got holes in his game, obviously, but he's the best roller in the league. He's one of the best lob threats in the league. He's a good offensive rebounder. All these things are true, but he's still somebody who's going to want the ball in his hands a bit more than a Jared Vanderbilt. But, Rudy went from being really the number 2 option for most of his career in Utah behind Donovan Mitchell to now he's very clearly the 4th option in the offense in Minnesota. He's still going to want his touches. So how are the Wolves going to do that? And how is Chris Finch going to be creative with the Wolves offense? And we saw a lot of that here in this game. The Wolves ran a ton of dribble handoffs early in the game. I should also note Karl-Anthony Towns sat out as was to be expected. Rudy and D'Angelo Russell both played after neither of them played on Tuesday night in Miami. So Cat was the only rotation player that did not suit up for this game. And the Wolves ran a ton of, so it was the regular starting lineup, but with Naz Reid at the 4. They ran a lot of dribble handoffs with some interesting backside action to try and get duck-ins for Rudy Gobert. They had a couple of plays where that was real early. It was like first or second possession, and Rudy drew a foul on the Lakers in the paint on the catch on a nice pass from D'Lo. But there's a bunch of dribble handoffs on the perimeter, which are so lethal when you got Anthony Edwards coming downhill at you. D'Lo's maybe less of a threat, certainly less of a threat coming downhill, but he's still a 3-level scorer and somebody who can pull up and shoot a 3 on a dime. And in dribble handoff action, that could be really dangerous. Ant can do the same thing, but he can also get a full head of steam and dunk over you. So dribble handoffs, I was clamoring for more of that last year. We saw a lot of it, especially early in this game. I really liked how often the Wolves in the secondary break in the open floor, and the Wolves played at the fastest pace of any team in the league last season. And we're going to see that again this year. And Rudy as a trailer is going to be absolutely dynamic. But I loved watching the secondary break into pick and rolls, right? In the Ryan Saunders offense, the Wolves ran a ton of structured pick and rolls with D'Angelo Russell. It was D'Lo Cat pick and roll, D'Lo Cat pick and roll, D'Lo Cat pick and roll over and over and over and over. And it was good. It wasn't great because there just needed to be more diversity to the offense and less complicated diversity, right? Because that was a thing with Saunders and with his dad's offense too. Sometimes it was just a little too complicated. Good, but complicated, right? Finch has a much more simple, yet at the same time diverse offense. So instead of calling these pick and rolls where the play calls for a pick and roll, and that's what it is, and there's just less happening elsewhere on the floor, Finch wants to run pick and rolls out of fast breaks. He wants to run secondary break actions. So not if you're not familiar with that term, basically not your primary option in transition. Because if you can get a dunk, layup, open 3 in transition, you do it. If that's not open, you run into your secondary break action. Right. So that's what then flows into your half court offense. And by the time that's over, you've got to be into something anyway, because the shot clock's short enough. You're not going to, reset. Most of the time, you're only truly calling plays after a made basket. And in the Wolves case, they run after made baskets a lot too. But Finch even said this, actually. I think it was the end of first quarter interview on ESPN when he talked to the ESPN sideline reporter. And he said he wanted to get into some random pick and rolls. He literally used the term random pick and rolls, his words. I think that's so perfect because the Wolves are going to do that a ton. And Finch talks about setting up guardrails, bumpers, as he calls it, like you're going, bowling with bumpers on the lanes, right? And allowing the team to figure it out within those bumpers. One of the things Finch is doing is saying, let's run some of the structured offense with dribble handoffs and these, backside screens to get guys going to the basket and get guys in the dunker spot, get some lobs. But if we get the opportunity, let's run. And if we run and it's not there, let's go directly into a pick and roll as a primary action of the secondary fast break. And whether that's Rudy and D'Lo or Ant and Rudy or Cat and Rudy or Ant and Cat, whatever it is, whatever the pairing, or in this case, it's Naz Reid, you're going to get a really good bucket if D'Angelo Russell's operating pick and roll with Rudy Gobert. And that's your secondary break action. You have a good fast break team. Your secondary break's dangerous. Your half court's going to be great with your dribble handoff and all your different options you have. There's just so many different ways to score. It's such a genius way to approach it because the Wolves are going to get into, as Finch calls it, plenty of random pick and rolls. When things break down, Rudy, go set a screen. You're the best screener in the league. Now roll. You're the best roller in the league. D'Lo's one of the best pick and roll ball handlers in the league. And we've talked about this a lot, improved a ton in his rookie season or in his sophomore season. Coming out of his rookie season, last season, was much better as a pick and roll ball handler. It's going to be so dynamic and so versatile. The only issue I really had was they still shot, and this is weird because they actually reduced these last year. There are a few too many mid-range, kind of pull-up mid-range jumpers, D'Lo and Ant. Ant does it a little bit. I mean, there's no reason Ant should be pulling up from mid-range when he's a good three-point shooter and so good in the paint. Or, obviously that number needs to come up too, the percentage at the rim for Ant. But dynamic in the paint, dangerous in the paint. The ceiling for him in the paint is otherworldly. There were a couple too many of those mid-range contested pull-ups, and some went in, some didn't. And those are fine shots, at the end of the shot clock if you have to get them, and both Ant and D'Lo can make them. But when you have such talented offensive players that are generally really efficient, there's no reason to lean on those shots. So as long as that's part of Finch's bumpers, as long as he says, hey guys, I don't want these shots unless, call it, there's 5 seconds or less on the shot clock or whatever. That could be another one of those bumpers. I don't know. I mean, D'Lo's good enough in the mid-range. He can get away with it, but there was still a little bit too much of it in this game. And there's no excuse for Ant to really be doing that early in the shot clock. So in general, really impressive to see the versatility of this offense without Karl-Anthony Towns, who is their best currently right now, absolutely their best offensive player. And it's not really all that close. D'Lo's not efficient enough. Ant's not quite there efficiency-wise. And Rudy's got a ton of limitations, but he's just outstanding at what he's good at, right? Um, but without their best offensive player, it was an impressive offensive performance. And I know that I think they were down by a bucket at the end of the first quarter. The game started off a little bit slowly, but the actions were all there. The shots just weren't going in. The defense was a little sloppy. And then obviously things clicked in the second quarter with the second unit, actually. But in general, with a preseason game, you're more focused on like, what are they running? It's not the result as much because, shots are going to go in at some point over the course of the season. These guys are all really good scorers. It's more, are they running the actions? What actions are they running? And than it is the actual result of the play. So really impressive offensive performance in terms of execution in my mind, and also a fun kind of look into what Finch wants to do. Next, I want to talk about a few other takeaways from this game. I've got, call it 4 additional before we do studs and duds here at the end of the show. First, though, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that is, of course, our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. I will say, Thursday night, I was watching the Timberwolves game. I did take the under on BetOnline.net on the what apparently was a hideous. I guess I watched the first part of it until the Wolves game. I would say a pretty hideous Broncos. Who do they even play? The Broncos were more offensive in that game. The Broncos and Colts. I definitely took the under, and I should have taken the under a lot heavier than I did because, man, there was 21 total points. I think the line was 41 or 41 and a half. Anyway, BetOnline's the place you got to go. Football all weekend. So if you're into that, and then also win totals, that it's still 48 and a half, by the way. The Timberwolves win total at BetOnline is sitting at 48 and a half. Hammer that over. I mean, I just don't. It was 40. They won 46 games last year and added Rudy Gobert. Like, what are we doing? Hammer the over on the Timberwolves 48 and a half. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events. That includes Major League Baseball, which now the playoffs begin today, actually, on Friday. MMA, boxing, plus golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. This coming Monday, make sure you check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview on the Locked On Network. Starts October 10th. That's this Monday, a 6-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NBA season. The local team experts and the NBA insiders of the Locked On Podcast Network and Odyssey all combined into one Ultimate NBA Preview. I was part of the Teams on the Rise group with a few other hosts, Memphis, the Raptors, Cleveland, let's see, who else was in that group? I'm forgetting 2 teams. We recorded a couple days ago. It's a great listen. I promise. It's fantastic. Teams on the rise that are kind of on the verge, playoff teams that are on the verge of like home court advantage. What's this? Exciting up and coming teams. So that all there's 6 episodes. That's one of them. They all post next week, starting Monday the 10th. You can search for Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. Additional takeaways beyond the Timberwolves offense, beyond Chris Finch's offense. Let's talk about the backup center battle. So Naz Reid started at the 4 in this game with no Karl-Anthony Towns, and Nate Knight actually didn't see the floor. I don't believe he played until, I don't think he played till the second half in this game, which was interesting. Rudy got a lot of first. Yeah, that's true because Naz played some backup 5 minutes in the first half, and then Rudy came back in and didn't play in the second half. So first half was all Rudy and Naz at the 5. Second half, Nate Knight got into the mix. But both Naz and Nate Knight played really well. Naz Reid started at the 4, played some at the 5 when Gobert hit the bench. And Naz had 8 points, 5 rebounds, and assists, a couple of blocks, a couple of really impressive blocks where he avoided contact and blocked the ball away. There was one in particular. I don't remember which player it was on the Lakers, but it was essentially a free run to the rim, and Naz somehow blocked the shot and avoided body contact. And it was a really kind of the sort of play that, I mean, frankly, Towns really struggles at. I mean, Towns would have a tough time getting the shot block without committing a foul in that instance, and Naz did a great job. And if you're a regular listener to this podcast, Naz is one of those guys I'm a little harsher on than I think a lot of people. Like, I like Naz Reid, right? But the rebounding struggles for him have been too significant for him to be, in my opinion, a consistent center in the NBA. He probably is a better fit at the 4 anyway. And next to Rudy, he looked really good in this game. 8 points, 5 rebounds, and assists, 2 blocks. Like I said, 3 of 6 shooting, made a couple of threes, was aggressive defensively, was aggressive on the glass. It was almost like who knows, maybe it's because it's the second preseason game, but it was almost like he had a boost of confidence knowing that Rudy Gobert was there and he had his back and he could just kind of go play free and easy. Nate Knight also off the bench. He was fantastic. 11 points, 3 rebounds in just 10 minutes, 4 or 5 shooting, knocked down a 3 himself, wide open 3 from the top of the arc late in the fourth quarter, had an assist, was a plus 11 in his 10 minutes. Really nice minutes from Nate Knight, physical. And I've said this, we talked about this quite a bit this offseason, but one of the things I'm really watching out for is who's going to get those backup minutes, because there's not going to be very many. Finch has already said he wants to stagger Rudy and Cat. He should be able to do that for most. He should be able to have at least one of Rudy and Cat on the floor for most games, for most of the 48 minutes in the game. But of course, with foul trouble, that isn't always possible. So who's going to get those additional minutes? My prediction all along has been it's Nas early. It won't be every night, but when they need it, it's Nas. And then depending on matchups, you may see some Nate Knight. But I think by the end of the year, you're going to see a lot more Nate Knight. I still believe that. And they were both good in this game. I just think Knight's a more well-rounded player. Well, and in a vacuum, if we're still talking ceilings, both are still relatively young players. Nas probably has a higher ceiling. He does things that are maybe he has more wild moments than Nate Knight, but Knight is a better all-around, more solid player and is a little more physical, can rebound the ball a bit better. And I just think that's valuable in a backup big. So not both, but all that to say, that's something to keep an eye on. Both Nas and Nate Knight. Nate Knight's going to make this team. Don't let anybody tell you he's fighting for the 15th spot. He's making the team. Both of them played well in this game, though, and that was great to see. An interesting kind of side note: we haven't talked much individually about like Ant, Jaden McDaniels, D'Lo, but Ant and Jaden McDaniels both rebounded the ball extremely well. Jaden had 7 rebounds in 20 minutes. Ant had 6 in 23 minutes. That's an issue for both of them, right? The Wolves were like third to last, I think, in the league, like 28th or 29th in rebound rate, or I should say in defensive rebound rate specifically. And a big reason for that was because Karl-Anthony Towns and Jared Vanderbilt were like the only guys that rebounded. I mean, Jaden McDaniels is gigantic. Obviously, has a slight frame and played a lot of 3 last year, but he's got to rebound his position better than he has the past couple of seasons. Anthony Edwards, the expectations are maybe lower because he's more on the perimeter than Jaden is. But like, there's no excuse for him to be as bad rebounding the ball as he was last year. I don't have it in front of me, but I want to say his rebound rate was like 6.5% or something crazily low. Like with Ant's size and physicality, and also he's a smart player. He can jump passing like some of those things. If you're jumping passing lanes and you have that anticipate, it's a bit of a different skill, but anticipate the rebounds, like go after rebounds. And he was aggressive in this game doing that. Now, we'll see if that sticks throughout the season. But if Ant is as aggressive as he was on the glass throughout the season as he was in this game, that's going to be significant. That's going to help all those advanced metrics and all those things that people look at to decide whether or not he's improving. That's a real area of his game that he must improve, is rebounding. And that goes for, like I said, for Jaden as well, both of them. And they both rebounded the ball well in this game, combined for 13 rebounds in a combined 43 minutes. So a really strong performance on the glass. And that was refreshing to see because it would have been easy to just kind of mail that in a preseason game, especially. And they both did a good job with it. I also thought it was notable that Jaylen Nowell was the first off the bench, even when Jaden McDaniels picked up 3 fouls in the first 3 minutes, not even 3, it was like first 2 minutes and 10 seconds of the game. McDaniels picked up 3 fouls. I should point out, I had written down I was going to talk about that issue for him, but he played another 18 minutes and didn't commit another foul in the game. So Jaden picked up 3 fouls in the first 2-ish minutes, and played 20 in the game, didn't pick up another foul. So good for Jaden. But notably, Jaden McDaniels was the first one to hit the bench with the foul trouble 2 minutes into the game. And Jaylen Nowell was the first one to come in. So that meant that he was at the 2 and Ant slid back up to the 3, which is where he played much of last season. So I thought that was interesting that, and who knows, it's preseason, but I thought it was telling that Finch didn't go straight to Taurean Prince, or even to Kyle Anderson. Like he could have done that too. Anderson could have played the 3. But he instead decided to go with Jaylen Nowell. And I think that's going to be, I think it's whoever hits the bench first, and Jaylen Nowell is going to be the first sub in. Unless of course it's a big due to foul trouble, and then it's probably Kyle Anderson. But if it's, I guess maybe not if it's D'Lo, but if it's Ant or if it's Jaden McDaniels, if one of those guys gets into foul trouble in the first few minutes of the game, it looks like Jaylen Nowell is going to come in and play the 2. Or if it's Ant, he comes in and plays the 2. If it's Jaden McDaniels that goes out, Ant slides to the 3 and Nowell plays the 2. So I thought that was interesting that Nowell's the first one off the bench. It wasn't Prince. It wasn't Kyle Anderson. It was Jaylen Nowell. And we'll talk more about him next segment. Spoiler, he was fantastic. Jaylen Nowell played really, really well. My last thing is Jordan McLaughlin, which we'll also talk about him in the next segment. But I wanted to just kind of shout him out because he was phenomenal in this game. You could argue he was the best player overall on the floor in this game. And it's crazy because he only had 4 points on 4 shots in 15 minutes. He had 6 assists, 0 turnovers, a couple of steals, orchestrated pick and roll just beautifully. A couple of great passes to Rudy. Had a couple of really nice change of pace buckets of his own where he kind of got a step and did a hesitation dribble, got the defender on his back and made a tough layup. Really strong performance for Jordan McLaughlin. He looks so comfortable. And there were times last year where he didn't. It was like, wait a minute, why was he? Early last season, I think he had some issues, but then he had that really long stretch of the like 50 whatever assists to like 1 turnover in January, February. And then from that point on, remember, he of course played those playoff minutes instead of D'Lo at the end of the final playoff game. So, I mean, if he could start strong this season, he's going to have a consistent role as a backup point guard. I've talked a little bit about, like Austin Rivers, Bryn Forbes, and Jaylen Nowell. They're all kind of insurance policies at point guard. Like they don't have a third string point guard. There just isn't one. There's not one on a 2-way. It's just a combination of Rivers, Forbes, and Nowell. None of those guys are actually point guards, but they can all do it on some level. They all have strengths and weaknesses at that spot. So depending on matchups, it's possible if McLaughlin's struggling, it's possible they could bench him, right? But if he plays really well, he's going to play every night. I mean, if he can prove that he is the guy, and obviously they have a lot of faith in him because they don't have a third point guard. So I think that'll be a really interesting thing to watch here as we move forward. All right, let's close the show with some quick studs and duds. All right, if you're new to the show, we do studs and duds as the final segment of every post-game pod. Typically, I'll name 3 players who I would say were the best performers on the Timberwolves and 1 to 2 who were the worst. I'm going to cheat a little bit on the first one this year, break my rules. So I guess it is kind of the Wild West in some ways, but I'm going to name 4 studs and no duds. No duds because, hey, it's preseason. Nobody played enough to like really play poorly. I mean, you could cherry pick guys that were 0-4 from the floor because everybody that played got a shot up. The only guys that didn't make buckets were Josh Minott in 10 minutes and CJ Ellaby in 9 minutes. They didn't play bad. They were fine. Like, it's preseason. There's no duds. But I will not hold back during the regular season because if guys don't play well, that's the list they hit. But studs, I'm going to name 4, and I could have probably named more too. The Wolves played really well in this game, but we'll name Rudy Gobert. In his first game in a Timberwolves uniform, albeit preseason, 5 points, 12 rebounds, only attempted 4 shots, was 2 of 4, 1 of 2 at the line, 3 assists, 2 steals, no blocks for Rudy, but only 1 turnover in 17 minutes. The 12 boards in 17 minutes is the most impressive. And the feel, like there were a couple of misses on pick and roll where D'Lo kind of threw the ball away, and it was hard to tell whose fault it really was. It was more just like, hey, Rudy and D'Lo are getting used to playing together. But there were also a couple of really impressive plays. He had a nice offensive rebound, put back dunk. He had a couple nice plays with J-Matt, with Jordan McLaughlin, rebounding again, impressive. The defense, even though he had no blocks, the defensive presence was on display. There was one play real early in the game. I don't remember who it was. Somebody on the Lakers like started to go to the basket and saw Rudy and just like dropped the ball out of bounds, just like rolled down his leg. I mean, that's the sort of thing like that doesn't happen when Cat's in the paint. It just doesn't. So that's going to be huge this year. Rudy played well in his 17 minutes in his unofficial Timberwolves debut. Second, this is in no particular order, but I also have Nate Knight down as a stud for this game. We talked about him a bit already, but the numbers are nice. 11 points, 3 rebounds, 1 assist in 10 minutes, 4 of 5 shooting, 1 of 2 outside the arc, 2 of 3 at the line. Physical, present. Those are probably the 2 words I would use to describe Nate Knight. Professional, if I had to pick a third. Maybe I'll start doing that. Maybe it's just 3 words for every stud, every game. Just leave it at that. But present, professional, and physical. 3 Ps too for Nate Knight. Fantastic game from him off the bench. I hope he ends up seeing some minutes this year at some point because I really like him as a player. Jaylen Nowell, haven't talked about him much yet on this show. If you're a regular listener, he is, not ashamed to say one of my favorites. I've called him out a couple years ago as somebody who I thought should see regular minutes. I predicted earlier this offseason that he likely, that I think he'll receive some votes for 6th man of the year when this thing's all said and done. He was phenomenal in this game. 13 points in 15 minutes, 4 of 6 shooting, very efficient. 1 of 2 on threes, 4 of 5 at the line, 4 rebounds, 1 block, one turnover was a plus 17 in 15 minutes for whatever that's worth. But Jaylen just very comfortable. Had a couple of really nice kind of penetration, drives where he got penetration, stopped at the edge of the paint and hit a tough floater, absorbed some contact. Had a couple where he did get all the way to the bucket. He's a good jump shooter. Like, all those things are clicking. He's a true 3-level scorer, and that was on display in this game. He didn't really initiate much offense. He wasn't asked to do that much here, but he can. We saw that last year. And again, for new listeners, I liken him to a cross between his offensive game is a cross between D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards, with really everything, every offensive skill. It's like a weird blend between the two. And I think that's really valuable to have off the bench. He can pair with either guy. And also, bigger picture, his 2-man numbers with Karl-Anthony Towns were better than anybody else on the roster. He and Towns were the best pairing on the Wolves roster last season. So I think Jaylen sees a ton of run this year, and he is the true 6th man. Last one was Jordan McLaughlin. We talked about him already a little bit, but I'll rattle off the numbers here real quick. Little J-Mac had 4 points, 6 assists, 2 steals, 2 of 4 shooting in 15 minutes, and was a crazy plus 25 in 15 minutes. Was an absolute maestro in the pick and roll. Frankly, orchestrated the pick and roll better than D'Lo. And D'Lo wasn't bad this game. He had a couple of ill-advised jumpers, but D'Lo was fine. Jordan McLaughlin was really good. Initiating offense for the Wolves. So good to see that. All things considered, a really impressive game. The Wolves have a couple of, I believe, both double-digit wins, if I'm not mistaken, so far this preseason. They beat Miami by 10. They beat the Lakers by 15. They play the Clippers coming up here on, I believe it's Sunday night at 9:30, Wolves Clippers. So we'll do a post-game pod for Monday's show. I think we'll do that. We'll do a post-game pod for Monday's show out of that game Sunday night. I believe that game is also, I think all the preseason games are broadcast locally on Bally. So hopefully you'll get a chance to see that. We'll talk about it on Monday. But thanks for listening once again to Locked On Wolves. A big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen each and every day. Again, if you're new, this is a daily program, Monday through Friday during the season. Actually, really throughout most of the calendar year. But Monday through Friday, we'll do post-game pods the morning after, or sometimes late the same night in the regular season, especially. So that's a consistent, and then we'll kind of, talk about the main themes throughout the year every single day, Monday through Friday. Of course, you can find the show anywhere: YouTube, Apple, Google, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find it. You can also follow us on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken. Brand new. You have to download the new Locked On Sports Minnesota app wherever you listen to or I shouldn't say that. The Locked On Sports Minnesota app is available on Roku or Amazon Fire TV. So whichever your streaming platform preference is, whether it's the Fire Stick or Roku, you can download Locked On Sports Minnesota. This show, plus all other Locked On Minnesota podcasts, are available. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's absolutely free. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. And for your second listen, go check out Locked On Fantasy Basketball. The fantastic Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 daily fantasy basketball show on the planet. It's free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast. We'll catch you next time. Have a great weekend.